everyone, and welcome to the Literacy and Foundation to Level 2 Classrooms webinar. Tonight we are talking about phonological awareness. Now on the screen here, I'll just put a little note, please download the supporting resources package from Fuse. So you can see the link there. You can go to Fuse and just search for webinar series, and also the Padlet address, but I'll come back to that in a second. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we all come to this session, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I am coming to you from Wurundjeri land, so I'd like to pay my respects to them. If you are not familiar with me, my name is Narissa Leung. I'm an education consultant here in Victoria, former primary school principal, and this year, so lucky to be a book week judge. I was judging the Eve Pownell information book category, had a fantastic time and I learned so much. And I'm super excited for book week coming up later in this term. So I hope everyone's getting their costumes ready. That is not a night before job, that one. If you want to contact me, I'm @RissAl on Twitter. I'm Auslit Teacher on all of the other pipes. Please don't look for me on Edgemail. I don't currently have an account with Edgemail, so if you want to contact me via email, I'm narissaleung@gmail.com. Now, on the right-hand side, I always like to introduce myself by way of books, what I'm currently reading. I am currently reading Fish in a Tree. This book has been recommended so many times to me as a class novel, and I guess I've left it so long to read it because it's not an Australian author, and I always try and read Australian authors first. But wow, I'm really enjoying it. I can see why people recommend it as a class novel. And actually, it's pretty relevant to tonight's topic. It's about a girl who really struggles with reading at school. She doesn't want anyone to know that she can't read and she has writing difficulties. And then, of course, a brilliant teacher comes along, sees the spark within her and identifies her strengths and helps her to build those. So it's actually a really great book and one that I do recommend. It's a bit old for a after 2 class novel, but above that, I think, yes, it would be I would recommend it for that. Okay, so talking about the webinar series. Now, this tonight's session was actually supposed to happen last term. My apologies for that. Just had a literal technical issue. I had no power at my house. I am obviously beaming to you from my house, working remotely. So tonight, already in this series, I've spoken about assessment, the workshop model, speaking and listening. All of those webinars are available to watch on YouTube now. You can watch those at any stage. And all of the topics are relevant to F2 teachers. Tonight we're talking about phonological awareness, next interactive writing, and then finally the writing process. So how this works, if you're new to the series, is we have a Padlet or a Backchannel or a chat, whatever you want to call it. And this is where where all the good stuff happens. Well, hopefully some of the good stuff happens actually on this PowerPoint. If you go to tinyurl.com and then that address there, you can join in with the conversation, particularly tonight, because I really want you to share some of the tasks and successes that you've had with phonological awareness and phonemic awareness activities with your students. So join that Padlet, and we always start by getting you to introduce yourselves, say hello, tell us where you're from. And also I have a very talented group of DET staff working in the background, responding to questions, posting links to resources and the like. The good thing about that Padlet is it's available after tonight's session finishes. So if you think, oh my goodness, what was that resource? How do I get it again? You can just go back to that Padlet address and pull it up again, and you'll have the links to all of the resources. So I look forward to seeing your questions and comments in the Padlet. Okay, so tonight we are talking about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. I'm going to talk about what those things are and the difference. And then this old chestnut, vocabulary. Now, vocabulary was supposed to be in one of the previous webinars, but we ran out of time. So we thought, rather than rush through it in 5 minutes, because it definitely needs more than 5 minutes, we have added it on to tonight's agenda. So, and actually, I think it actually really fits well with phonological awareness. So we'll see what you think. All right, so the success criteria for tonight's session, let's go to the understanding goals first. That always helps. Okay, so you're going to build your understanding of the theory that underpins instruction in phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and vocabulary. Deepen your understanding of a range of teaching practices that can help students in this area. And as always, reflect on your own teaching practices. Now, the success criteria. Outline differences between phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, and phonics. Identify effective teaching strategies that can be used to support students in their vocabulary development, and reflect on the literacy teaching and learning practices in your classroom or in your school. Alrighty, without any further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to start by talking about phonological awareness. And of course, what the question is, what even is phonological awareness? And I don't think it's a bad thing to ask this question, because I would say that a large portion of us went through university when we didn't actually talk about any of this stuff. So don't feel bad if this is brand new knowledge for you. That's perfect. Welcome. That's perfectly fine. So what is phonological awareness? I've used this definition from Duke and Cartwright. They've just put out a recent article. Really love the work of Duke and Cartwright in this area. They say it's conscious attention to the sounds in spoken language, including words, syllables, onsets, rhymes, and individual phonemes, or phonemic awareness. So for me, thinking about phonological awareness, I think of it as like a bit of a funnel. So, you know, that the big idea, oh, words, and then the smaller idea that words can be broken down into syllables, the smaller idea going down that funnel that syllables can be broken into onset and rhyme. Now you'll see there, rhyme, R-I-M-E, is different to what I've put on the fourth line there, rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E, different thing. And then finally, right down the bottom of the funnel is the phoneme, the smallest unit of sound in a word. So for word, we've got dog, syllable, you know, break it up into the different parts. Onset and rhyme, is the onset, at is the rhyme, whereas a rhyme and a rhyme is bite and light. They sound the same, but they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily use the same R-I-M-E rhyme at the end. And phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a word. So that's what we're talking about, the phonological awareness, that awareness that words can be broken down into these smaller parts. And it's all about sound, okay? So it's attention to sounds in spoken language. Phonemic awareness is actually a part of phonological awareness. So phonological awareness is the umbrella term. Phonemic awareness sits underneath phonological awareness. It's a subset of phonological awareness. So here it's the ability to hear and manipulate the sounds within words, right down to the smallest part, okay? I'm going to explain that a little bit more. So if you're still thinking, oh goodness, you know, those two things sounded so similar, don't worry. The third P that I'll introduce is phonics. So sometimes people think phonological awareness or phonemic awareness and phonics, they're all interchangeable. Well, they're actually not. They all mean certain things. And it's really important to understand the difference between the three things. Phonics is the mapping of speech sounds, so the phonemes, to letters, graphemes, okay? So the easiest way to remember the difference between these two things, phonological awareness can be done without any eyes, as my diagram terribly depicts here. It's all about the ears. Phonological awareness is all about sound. What can you hear in words? When you're teaching phonological awareness, you don't need any manipulatives in front of you because it is all based on the sound. Whereas phonics over on the, you can see why I'm not a graphic designer, okay? I get it. It's a very basic diagram. Phonics involves the ears and the eyes because you're matching the sound that you hear to things that you can see on the page, the letters that you can see on the page or the graphemes. So in its most pure form, that's what phonological awareness is all about, the sounds. Phonics is when you start joining those sounds onto the things that you can see on the page. Now, I only put this image here just so you can distinguish between the two. This is not to say that when you teach phonological awareness, you don't start bringing in the letters, because actually the research is showing that it is beneficial to start to bring in the letters when you're doing phonological or teaching around phonological awareness. But just so that you know the difference, when someone's talking about phonological awareness, they're talking about the student's ability to break the word up just by sound without actually looking at something. Okay, a couple of bits of research. I always love the research. I love the research because I think if you have a good understanding of why this is important and what the background theory is, then you are more likely to implement it with fidelity in your classroom. You are less likely to grab a random program off the shelf and start implementing it without really being able to evaluate its effectiveness. So even though sometimes research can be a little bit boring and bland, I think it's so important because this is what makes a difference between sustained and effective practice and sort of that show grab bag kind of, oh, this looks fun, let's do this type of practice. So, give me a second, I'll just share some of the research with you. Directly from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, which is what this whole series is about, talking to you about that. Phonological awareness is a crucial skill to develop in children. It is strongly linked to early reading and spelling success through its association with phonics. And I think that's probably something that phonological awareness is absolutely linked to reading, it is linked to writing, and it is linked to spelling. So there's a lot of bang for your buck if the students have strong phonological and phonemic awareness. Research has shown that explicit phonemic awareness instruction increases reading and spelling achievement among all groups of students, basically. All right, so that's phonemic. So when we're just talking about the smaller sounds. And this one I think is really important. Children need solid phonemic awareness training in order for phonics instruction to be effective. Now, I think this one's really important because if you don't understand this and you launch into teaching a phonics program or, launch into phonics instruction and your students don't have that solid foundation of phonemic awareness, it makes the phonics instruction far less impactful. So it's the difference, if the students don't have phonemic awareness and you start saying, sand, soft, silky, what's the start, what sound can you hear at the start of that? If students don't understand that, firstly, that the word sand can be broken down into smaller parts and that one of those parts can be separated to be this, the first sound that you can hear in that, then they're not going to be ready for that phonics instruction. So phonemic awareness is really important and critical for phonics instruction to be effective. Now, what's that? I'm going to share this because this is on the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, hopefully the updated version of the image. It's a bit fuzzy, the one that's on there at the minute. So don't worry, we're working on updating that. Basically, there's consensus among research that phonological awareness, the skills in this precede for awareness of larger units. So go back to that funnel so that students or people start with that understanding of words and then they go down that funnel until they can get to that understanding of the smaller units. So this, interestingly enough, is true for all alphabetic languages. It's not just true for English. So this sequence of phonological awareness instruction comes from Schul and Bordereau. And I'm just going to give you a look at the breakdown here, and that this is a sequence that moves from less complex tasks right through to more complex tasks. So we start off with the capacity to break words into syllables. We move into rhyme awareness. Look at how that rhyme is spelled. Isn't that tricky? Why did they call it two things that sound the same? It's so frustrating. Anyway, rhyme awareness, alliteration, initial and final sound sorts. And don't worry, I'm going to go into each of these in detail. So you don't need to panic that this is going a bit quick. Onset, rhyme, segmentation. So we're building in difficulty here. And this is, among researchers, there's a general consensus that this is the progress that people make as they're developing their phonological awareness. Segmenting initial and final sounds, blending sounds into words, segmenting words into sounds, deleting and manipulating phonemes. Right, there's a lot there, isn't there? Okay, so we're going to go through it slowly, but what I did want to point out, so all of these things here are classed as phonological awareness because it's that you're working with sounds and understanding that you can break the word into smaller units of sound. Right, these ones here that I've just highlighted in grey are classed as phonemic awareness. So this is a subset of phonemic awareness. And we're going to, as I said, we're going to have a look at what each of these things mean. Okay, so let's start with words into syllables. Now, the other thing I want to say about this is it's important to understand this sort of progression through phonological awareness because the more you understand about each of these stages, the more you'll be able to target where are my students, what is their current knowledge, and where do they need me to do more instruction. So rather than kind of just thinking, oh, well, you know, they just need phonological awareness, we'll just hit them with something. It's really being able to break it down to say, okay, well, out of all the things that you could need to know about phonological awareness, where along this continuum is this particular student and where would they benefit from extra work? All right. So because we're going back to that, what Mary Jean Gallagher talks about, that idea of precision teaching. Okay, so let's go through each of these so to build your capacity to pinpoint where your students' needs are. Right, words into syllables. Syllables, hopefully not a new concept. A segment of speech uttered with a single impulse of air pressure from the lungs and consisting of one sound of relatively great sonority. Wow, that makes it so much clearer. Thank you for that. That was from Gillen's book. Okay, so what you can do, some suggested teaching ideas that would involve bringing awareness of students to syllables. Firstly, and sort of always thinking in that funnel mindset. So going from the big and working down towards the small. So I've suggested here first compound words. So they're probably the easiest way to start with. So if you think about breaking compound words into their part, bedroom, let's separate those two things, bedroom. Counting and tapping syllables. So counting the number of syllables in students' names. You know, you work with F2 students, you know how egocentric these kids are. So using their own name, something they're familiar with, certainly increases their level of engagement with whatever it is that you're doing. Locating syllables. So for this one, give a number and ask students to point to an object in the room that has that many syllables. Now, you can see you're not going to start with this activity if they're just getting their head around what a syllable is. It's going to be hard for them to look around the room and find a word that has two syllables. So they're sort of getting more tricky in complexity here. Blending syllables, so say two syllables and then have students join them together to form a room. So same thing with bedroom. Okay, I'm thinking of a word, oh, sorry, not cat. Sorry, I'm doing that. So if you're thinking about, bedroom. So I'm going to say a word, a secret word, and you have to join the two together and come up with the word. Segmenting syllables, have students locate the syllables in words. Now I'm going to show you a video of this. This is from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. The other reason I wanted to show this video is because you'll see that it's not necessarily foundation students. So this isn't thinking about this this continuum of learning. It's not necessarily that we teach all of the foundation syllables and then we teach them and then we never come back to it again. Because remember, we're talking about phonological awareness has impact on reading and it has impact on writing and on spelling. So in this lesson, they're working with syllables and the teachers are taking them even a step further so they can understand the connection with spelling. So let's have a look at this.
Can you type it for me, please? So the break is here. Where's our vowel here, Nora? What's our vowel in the first syllable? And saliva in the last one? Right, but it's not actually a vowel. What is it? Like a vowel-like sound, isn't it? This one's a bit of a tricky one. I want you to turn and talk for 1 minute again to the person next to you. going to ask you, Charlotte, because I had a good discussion between you and Rizwan. How many syllables in the word fence? But I can see 2 vowels in the word fence. I heard you saying something at the back there, Zane. What did you say about this word? We don't say? We don't say that because that's a silent E. So this word is fence. That's the only vowel that we're looking for in our syllable. So it's 1 vowel. Let's say that word together. Fence. Good.
All right, you can see there. And obviously the connection with spelling is that for each syllable, we're going to have a vowel or a vowel-like sound. So if our students firstly understand what a syllable is so that when they're writing, they can break their word into syllables, and then they know that, oh, each syllable has a vowel or a vowel-like sound, then we're going to start to see more vowels in our students' spelling. Yes! It's all interconnected, isn't it? Okay, so the next step on the sequence is rhyme awareness and production. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is so interesting, and I found the research on this so fascinating because there seems to be a bit of discussion around the effectiveness of spending a great deal of instructional time in this area of rhyme. So there was one body of research earlier, so I'm talking in the 70s, that said that rhyme production and the awareness of rhyme demonstrated and was a successful predictor of future performance in reading for students. But the interesting thing is that there's other research that says that actually rhyme isn't a really effective predictor of future success or ability in reading. So I think in the general consensus in the end is that rhyme is effective and important for students before they enter school. So lots of fairy tale, lots of nursery rhymes. And the thinking in the research was that if students are exposed to nursery rhymes from an early age, so I'm talking about 3 and 4, then they'll have an ear that's tuned in to be able to identify rhymes, which would then allow them to create their own rhymes, and it will also allow them to start to learn to play with words, which would help them to get to a point where they have more phonemic awareness, even if they can just identify the first sound in a rhyme. So yeah, really interesting, this one. But the final result is, yes, it's important, but we need to spend most of our teaching time further down in the phonemic awareness section of this, I don't know, what am I going to call this thing? Stare image. Okay, so we sometimes can get a little bit distracted and start spending all our instructional time down here in syllables and rhyme, when actually we need to sort of move through these parts fairly quickly so that we can get to the phonemic awareness, because the research shows that it's the phonemic awareness part of this that actually is the most powerful predictor of future reading performance. You know what research is like. There's research for everything, isn't there? All right, so rhyme awareness, and I'm talking about rhyme as in bite and light, so where the word sounds the same at the end but doesn't necessarily have the same R-I-M-E. So it refers to the awareness of words that rhyme and words that do not rhyme well. So thank you for that. Okay, so activities that you can use to develop students' rhyme awareness. As I've mentioned before, lots and lots of singing of songs that have little rhymes at the end. And then asking students to judge rhyme. So do cat and bat rhyme? Do cat and show rhyme? All right. Odd one out rhyme. So giving 3 words and saying which one of these words doesn't rhyme. So cat, hat, dog. Matching rhymes. Find words that rhyme with hat. Okay, so you could choose out of bell, cat, and top. And then the final level of this is asking students to generate their own rhymes. So giving them a word and asking them, what's a word that rhymes with this? So lots of exposure to nursery rhymes. And this is something that we need to encourage in the home as well. Lots of work on rhymes and nursery rhymes, and in our kinders as well, which is why it's so important to have those connections with your feeder kinders. So this stuff can be happening down there, and your students can become come to foundation, ready packaged, already knowing all about rhyme. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, so let's move up. The next step in this continuum is alliteration, initial and final sound sorts. Okay, so here, just a tip with talking about alliteration. This idea of starting with continuing sounds before stop sounds. So a continuing sound is something like a something that you can stretch out for a while, like a s and a r, so you want to be able to drag it out so the students can really hear clearly that it's a different sound as you're changing. So and then stop sounds is like a t, there's you can't stretch that any further than what you've just given it. All right, so just the suggestion in all of the research is to start with continuing sounds because they're easier to work with for the students. Okay, so first suggestion here, working with alliteration and initial and final sound sorts, judging the initial sound. So do run and swim start with the same sound? Run, swim. Can you see how I can drag out those letters to make it a bit easier for them to hear? So we're just working on that first. Do they have the same, do they start with the same sound? Then we're going into odd one out initial sound. So which word doesn't have the same sound at the beginning? So cat, ball, cup, king. So obviously, if you're playing along at home, ball is the answer, everyone. Matching initial sounds, which word begins the same as king? And then initial sound sorts, which word starts like fish and which word starts like sun. Now, just a reminder here, initially we're not using images, or so we're not using any letters. So we're just doing this just by sound, okay? You can use images here, but initially you don't want to be introducing letters because you don't want to be confusing the students. So you want to make sure that they're understanding this concept of words being able to be broken down into smaller parts before we start throwing letters in and making it, leveling up the difficulty. Okay, so here we go. I've got some illustrations for you. So which word doesn't have the same sound? Which word starts like fish? Which word starts like sun? We can use some images here and they can move them around. And that's my cat Rosie on the left. She features in this. Okay, a final sound sort. So we're talking about the sound at the end of the word now. We can use images for this. Now, it's a sound sort. It's not a letter sort. So it's not which one of these words end with the letter T. This is which ones end with the sound T. Okay, so bat, cat, slept. All right, the same for D. It's not which ones end with the letter D, but which ones end with the sound D. So cloud, bad, heard, glide. I wouldn't have pictured that. I don't think that bad image is good enough. I could have put my niece down there. That would have been a more appropriate picture. All right, let's have a pause because we've made our way through the continuum until the phonemic awareness part. So all of the activities that we've spoken about so far have been related to phonological awareness, but not phonemic awareness. So I'm going to just give you a 2-minute pause, and in the resource pack, just want you to think about, okay, what does this mean? What do I agree with so far? What's new for me? What questions do I have? I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, I know 2 minutes is really quick, but it's just enough to have a little pause because it's a lot of talking otherwise, just to, let some of that sink in. I would love to see in the chat some of your thinking at the moment. And I can see that the literacy team are posting a question in there. Let's keep moving. All right, so we're moving into the phoneme level. Now, this is the one that the research says has the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to instruction and then impact on later reading and spelling ability. So let's tune right into this one. Okay, so onset, rhyme, segmentation. Let's have a look at this. Now, so syllables can be broken into an onset and the rhyme. So the onset is the initial consonant preceding the vowel or the vowel sound in a syllable. So if we're thinking about cat, the onset is the k because it comes before the vowel. The rhyme, R-I-M-E, is the vowel and all of the following consonants in the syllable, okay? So let's have a look at, this is another video from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, and they are looking at onset and rhyme. I quite like this one.
I'm going to put it in a box. And I'm going to write, what's that rhyme? Red. I'm going to put R in a box. This is our onset. What's our onset? Sound? Good. Our rhyme is, our onset is better. Let's change our onset again. Let's make a new word. Shakira. Can be made up. Ooh. Ooh, do you have a sound in there? No. Let's try again. Ed. Fed. I said it's a real word. It is a real word. Well done. Let's do it. I said a word. Ed. Fed. Let's read them. Read, wed, fed. And what do we notice about these letters? Ed. They're all the same. They've all got ed. Fantastic. What word are you going to make with your new onset? Can you do it for us? What sound? Makes. Fantastic. It is a real word. You're amazing. Ed. We teach phonics and phonological awareness every day, and the experiences that we give students are varied. So they will sing along with songs, read big books or picture storybooks, and then the activities that we get students to do are differentiated. So for example, today I was introducing the students to onset and rhyme. The differentiation came when we were doing the booklets with students. So some students had the ed rhyme, which was the same as what was completed in the explicit teaching mini lesson, whereas other students were extended to use a different rhyme that wasn't necessarily exposed to them in that session. Some students had the all rhyme and others had the ing. All right, what word have you got, Grace? Sing. And what's your picture showing? Sing. Well done. What word have you created for me? And what's our rhyme? And what's our onset? SW. SW. It makes a tricky sound when you put it together. It's one. Good. And you draw a name? Fantastic. What have we got here? What's this one? Ding. Excellent. What's our rhyme? Ing. Onset? Ding. D. We want the sound, remember? And the last one we're going to do? Spring. Spring. All right.
Now, apologies, I think the sound is a bit low on that. I'm going to blame WebEx because the PowerPoint is fine, but you can access all of those videos in the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. I actually sliced that one so it's a little bit smaller than it is on the toolkit, so if you want to have a look, there are some great videos on there. All right, so moving in to these ones are really high value teaching now. Segmenting initial and final sounds. Now, when we're talking about phonemic awareness, Segmenting is a less cognitively challenged task than when we get further up and we're deleting and manipulating sounds. So we're sort of adding a little bit of complexity each step that we go up here. So segmenting initial and final sounds. Let's have a look. Okay, so this is a more sophisticated version of alliteration. It requires children to identify and name the initial and final sounds rather than just sort words according to them. So they've got to do a bit more work here, okay? So this is, again, we're going to talk about continuing sounds. So segmenting initial continuing sounds. What's the first sound in fish? So this requires the students to be able to hold that word in their head, fish, and then realize that they can separate the sounds in that word to find the sound that is at the start, or the first sound, which is the f. Now, you do need to make sure that your students understand the concept of first or last, or at the start or at the beginning. And some of the literature suggests that you actually do work on that first. So you might have images of, 3 characters in a race, and you need to say, or actually they're running that way, who's first, who's last, or who's at the beginning, who's at the end, just so they can conceptualize, okay, first is at, that end, last is that end. Now we're going to apply that to sounds in words. So I can hold that sound in my head and I can think, okay, what's the first sound? So that's the sound up that end, and that is the f. Wow, isn't the brain amazing? All those things that go on just to be able to identify the first sound. And I think as proficient readers, I think sometimes we forget just how complex it is. All right, segmenting initial stop sounds. So a stop sound, remember, is one of those ones that you can't stretch out. So bat, doesn't go anywhere. That's it. Segmenting final continuing sounds. What's the last sound in bus? Big clue at the end there. And then segmenting final stop sounds. So what's the last sound in cat? Oh, yeah. All right. Sorry. In that second one, segmenting initial stop sounds, I said I'm talking about initial, so it's b, so bat. So lots of different things that you can do for talking about initial and final sounds. Lots of talk about it, using lots of different words, but thinking about the level of complexity. Keep using those continuing sounds first and then those stop sounds. Okay, so blending sounds into words. So blending is the equivalent of what we usually say, sound it out. So we're going to blend, join sounds together to turn them into words, okay? So these activities come from Heidi Mesmer's book, Letter Lessons and First Words. Her first suggestion for teaching students to blend sounds into words is a game called Secret Word. And just by the name of it, sounds super exciting. So the teacher says a secret word, and basically you just say it in its, you segment the sounds, you do the segmenting, and the students have to join those sounds together so that they can work out what word it is that you're talking about. So the teacher says b, g, and so the students need to join the b, g, bug. That's it. That's the secret word. You can see how exciting that game is. Chugging words, I mean, it's all the same thing, really, isn't it? It's just a different, a different disguise for the same activity. So in this one, the teacher uses 2 cubes for the 2 parts of the word. So the word is at, and we're going to have a visual here. And I've tried to watch my animations here. This took me about 15 or 20 minutes of wasted time. So the teacher has a cube for at and a cube for t and at, and you can see that he or she is joining them closer and closer together, so that, and saying the sounds at the same time. So it looks like this: at, until they're joined together, and the students have to guess what the word is that you've, they're blending the sounds to create a word. Just in case you missed my animations the first time. All right, so obviously there's more activities than that. There's just 2 things. There are more examples on the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, but really it's about providing the sounds and getting the students to move them closer and closer together until they can create the word we're practicing blending. And again, you can start just with sounds and then you can add letters into that as well. So you might start with blocks that just represent the sounds, and then you might add letters to those blocks and move them closer together. All right, segmenting words into sounds. So one is the word exists. I've just got to join it together. This one is the word exists and I now have to pull it apart. So it's a more cognitively challenging task than blending, okay? All right, so again, we want to use continuing sounds when you first start the segmenting work. So Heidi Mesmer's suggestion for this one is that tapping words. So the teacher says, let's tap pig. So let's tap pig, pig. Touch the fingers to your thumb for each sound. So we're starting with the word pig and then we're trying to break it into its individual sounds. You can see that it can be quite challenging because you have to be able to hear them and you have to be able to delineate differences in the sounds in the word. Robot talk, it's, you know, it's I don't know, a kiddie fun way of getting students to stretch out the word. So let's say the word go in robot talk. Go, go. You can practice the rest in your own time. Oh, here's my animation for pig. Ready? So we start with pig and then we stretch it out. Pig. And obviously this is going to help with when we go to write, because we're going to use this same skill when we think, oh, I want to write about a pig. So now I've got to be able to break it into its individual sounds. And then, so that's the phonemic awareness part. And then the phonics part is now what would be a letter that would represent each of those sounds. So it's pig, p-ig. That's the phonemic awareness. That's just the sound. What could be a letter or a collection of letters that could represent that sound? Oh, P. All right. So can you see how the phonemic awareness is different to the phonics, but it informs the phonics? Now, another suggestion for segmenting words is the use of Alcone Boxes. I don't know if you're familiar with these. Sometimes they're called sound boxes. And basically the idea for this is that as we're using our word, we're going to use our continuing sound. So we're going to use the word sat. So we're going to say the word sat first and have our students say the word sat. We're going to stretch it out. Sat. And then the Alcone boxes are just to visually demonstrate to students that there are different sounds in that word. So as you as the teacher are modeling, as you're saying sat, each time you hear a new sound, the idea is that you'll drag a counter down into the box. So it would look like this. Does that make sense? So the students can, okay, so there are 3 sounds. Now, initially, this again, you'll only use sounds and then you can start adding letters. So if you had a word like ip, that we're going to have 2 letters on the first counter. We're going to have ip, I on the second counter, and then we're going to have a P on the last counter. So we're always thinking about the level of complexity. What does this student need right now? Are they ready for letters? Are they ready for words with more phonemes in them? Do they need less phonemes? Do they need continuing sounds or stop sounds? Any wonder we're tired at the end of the day? All these things that we have to think about. Okay, the most complex area of phonemic awareness, or the most complex tasks in phonemic awareness involve deleting, manipulating phonemes, because it's high cognitive load for students. They've got to hold the word in their mind and then think, okay, if we're deleting the initial sound, got to think, okay, what's the first, hold the word, what's the first sound? Right, there it is. Okay, remove that, hold the rest of it in my mind. So there's a lot of work going on up there. So what does it look like? If we're talking about deletion, then and we're only talking about the ear version. We're not introducing letters just yet, or we're not mapping them to graphemes just yet. Say swing. Now say it again, but without saying the s. Okay, so you got to think, oh gee, okay, so I'm going to hold the word swing in my mind, in the sound of it, swing, and now I'm going to take off the start of it. So I have to know which part is the start and then remove that. And what am I left with? It's quite a hard mathematical equation, I think. Manipulation is the ability to hold that word in your brain, but exchange some of the sounds. So here, say hat again, but change the h to a Okay, so it's quite complex when you stop and think about it. Actually, this is really hard. It's not hard for us because, well, hopefully, because we are proficient readers. But for students, it can be really challenging. And this, we're certainly not expecting our foundation kids to be doing this in the first 6 or even 9 months of the year. But it's good to know the continuum, because you might have that outlying student who's ready for this. So deletion is taking letters off or taking letters out, and it's not just always the initial. You might ask them to remove the final, and when they're really clever, the manipulation could even involve removing or swapping the medial vowel. So if we've got mat, change the at to a et. So we're doing met. Really hard, really challenging. So again, we're going to start with continuing sounds, and you can add letters once they've got the idea. Wow, challenging. Now, if you are interested in learning more about the continuum of phonological awareness skills, I would recommend that you head to the Literacy Learning Progression, and you can have a look on there, the progression from foundation skills through to the Victorian Curriculum Level 1 skills. And it's quite interesting to have a look at that progression. And again, it's really to help you to better target the needs of your students, find out what the needs of your students are, and then work out where to aim your teaching. I might get in the resource pack at the end of this. I should have told you that I was we always send out a copy of the slides. So we'll put a link to that continuum in there as well. All right, I just want to talk about phonological awareness and EAL students because there are some challenges sometimes with students who are learning English, particularly if their first language isn't similar to English. So if it's a logographic language, then sometimes there could be more challenges. So just having a look at this comes from Gillen's work. She says that the acquisition of phonological skills in children learning to speak and read in 2 languages is influenced by a range of factors. And I think that's something that we really need to keep in mind as teachers, is that not all EAL students are exactly the same. In fact, they're all very, very different. And our job is to work out, what are some of the factors for this particular student. It's not a sort of one size fits all approach. All EAL students would benefit from X. So some of the factors that need to be considered in terms of phonological awareness for EAL students: the child's age of acquisition of the languages. So are they starting to learn English when they're 10 versus when they're 2? The child's previous experience of the first language and its orthography. So any if you think about the nursery rhymes that we're talking about before, has the student had experience in that type of literature in their first language, and are they building phonological awareness in their first language as a result of that? The learning context within which the languages are being acquired, the level of language proficiency, the similarities between the 2 languages or orthographies. So European languages, the research suggests that students move along that, the stair continuum. The research suggests that students move along a similar continuum. It's just if it's not a sort of European or a language that is similar, an alphabetic language like English, that the students might need extra instruction in phonological awareness. So that's something to keep in mind, is that there could be some extra challenges for these students. Now, got a little note here. Phonological awareness is really important for students, and we read the research, and we know that phonemic awareness is important or informs phonics instruction. But I just wanted to share this quote from Gillen just to reiterate that idea that phonological awareness is necessary, but by itself, it's not sufficient. So we can't clear off our whole literacy program and just hit our kids with phonological awareness or phonemic awareness instruction. They need to be bathed in literature and literacy instruction that is in addition to the phonological awareness instruction. So Gillen says, the research findings convincingly demonstrate that phonological awareness is crucial for reading and spelling success. Skills at the phoneme level, such as phoneme analysis and deletion skills, have the strongest predictive power for long-term reading and spelling achievement. It is important, however, to keep phonological awareness in perspective with other necessary skills for reading and spelling. It would be incorrect to assume that all a child needs to read and spell are strong phonological awareness skills. Okay, I think that's a really timely reminder for us that there is just so much that goes into effective literacy instruction. Okay, before we finish up talking about phonological awareness for tonight, I just want to reiterate that in the very first webinar of this series, talked about the importance of acknowledging the teaching and learning cycle and the fact that we need to put assess at the start of that cycle. So what this means is that we need to work out what are the skills of my students so that we can work from there rather than kind of thinking that everyone will I'll just start way back here at the start and just give everyone the exact same instruction and that'll be great for everyone. We know the most effective instruction is differentiated. We know the most effective instruction is based on the needs of the students. So let's bring that into our phonological and phonemic awareness instruction. So we need to assess, find out what specifically do my students need to learn about phonological awareness. And I will say that's the stair diagram. It's not a case of students need to know everything there is to know about one step before they can move up to the next. That diagram is really just to help you understand that complexity of phonological awareness skills. So they don't have to know everything about one before they move on to the next. Right, when it comes to assessment, we are thinking here about educational research, not market research. So what is best for our kids? A couple of assessment resources provided by the department. You do have the English online interview and the date tools that come out of that. So the EOI by itself doesn't have an extensive amount of information about phonological awareness, but you can certainly use the date tools. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go back to the first webinar and you can have a look at those to go in deeper on what your students need to know in terms of phonological awareness. There's also a phonological knowledge assessment available on the Literacy Toolkit as well. So let's just have a look at the date tools. These are on the Insight platform. You can have a look here. You can select specific assessments on there for your individual students to do. So the thinking is that when your students engage in the EOI at the start of the year, then you'll be able to think, oh, okay, well, actually these students, I need to know a bit more about them. So then I'll go and use the date tools, the phonological awareness one, to drill down even a little bit further to find out specifically their strengths and stretches. So you can see in level D, identifying the syllables in words by clapping them out, identifying words that rhyme. And now that you know that staircase, you can see, oh yeah, that's right down on the lowest complexity. Foundation, blending onset and rhyme together, identifying words that rhyme. And then foundation number 3, generate words that rhyme with a given word. That's phonological awareness. And then there's a phonemic awareness one as well. This one you may not be familiar with, phonological awareness assessments. This is on the learning difficulties and dyslexia part of the Literacy Toolkit. So here there's an assessment for 5 to 8 year olds. There are also older assessments if you're working with students who are older than that. 4 parts that you can use on this assessment. 1 is recognizing and expressing simple rhyming units. 2 is segmenting words. 3, blending sounds. 4, manipulating sounds into words. And I hope you can see now, oh yeah, I can see they're getting harder or more complex in complexity now that you've got that stair diagram in your mind. So this might be something that's worth looking at, particularly for those students who just think, oh, I know that they just need a bit of extra support. This might help you pinpoint where it is that you need to be doing that instruction, rather than sort of a scattergun approach or just a general phonological awareness approach, to be more precise. Okay, final considerations for phonological awareness. A reminder that you are a professional and you have training, and programs don't teach kids, teachers do. And all of the research will tell you it is the teacher that makes the difference. It is not the program. So especially when you're able to pinpoint the needs of the students and teach from there, to be able to do that, you need to have that deep understanding yourself of that continuum to be able to work out where they are and what do they need next. Suggestion, just to work with your, as much as possible, to work with your local kinders, so to build some of the earlier phonological awareness skills into what they're doing, especially, you know, using those nursery rhymes and things. And then, of course, bringing parents on board to help them to understand their part, or the part that they can play in terms of helping you to build phonological awareness skills in the students, so that they're ready to go. They can hit the ground running when they start with you. All right, we're gonna have 2 minutes to reflect, and then we're going to talk about all things vocabulary instruction. So I'll give you 2 minutes to go into the resource package, talking about the phonemic awareness column here, and I would love to see in the chat your thinking or questions so far, or any resources that you've used that you've found helpful for teaching phonological or phonemic awareness. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, as I said, 2 minutes, very quick. Now, just a couple of things in the chat. Someone has rightly reminded people to be cautious of students voicing the sounds. So when they are saying the sounds, and this is particularly for students from an EAL background for some reason, will often put an on the end of the sound, like a but instead of a but, which shouldn't be voiced after the but. So that's something to watch out for, just to make sure students aren't adding an extra sound onto the end of a voiceless sound. Good reminder. Haven't seen any other questions yet, so I'll keep going. Oh, the other thing I'll say about that, just as a side note, in Jennifer Ceravello's The Reading Strategies book, some of you may be familiar with her work, she has recently re-released the 3rd chapter of that book, which I think is so exciting because it now is responsive to the most recent research in teaching students how to read. And she has some great strategies in there that for reading accuracy, and that is one of them, making sure that you remove the sound after the letter. So it's worth having a look at. It's You have to go onto a website to print it. You don't have to pay for a new copy or anything. She put out a message recently to say that needs to update it because the research has changed. And I think that's really terrific of her, a great role model to do that, to say that research changes. And so her suggestions on reading strategies are changing as well. So that just reminded me of that. Okay, so let's look at vocabulary. Poor old vocabulary that missed out on a Guernsey at our last webinar. So finally, we get to bring it to the front here. As I said, I think vocabulary is a really important part. Well, I think it actually matches well with what we've spoken about today, because for me, I feel like it's a natural progression, and there's so much about vocabulary instruction that we can integrate with our phonological awareness instruction. So firstly, I want you just to distinguish vocabulary is knowledge of words and their meanings. And really, when we're talking about vocabulary instruction, we are really building word consciousness. That's what our aim is, so that our students can, I guess, develop a curious about words and to notice them and to be interested in them. And it's that noticing and being interested in them that will help them to start to see inside of them, so they can start to, you know, wonder about the phonemes or the morphology of the word. So I just love vocabulary instruction. So right, let's look at some of the research. It's a lot of text on this page, I know, sorry. Research, okay. Vocabulary is a principal contributor to comprehension, fluency, and achievement. Vocabulary development is both an outcome of comprehension and a precursor to it, with word meanings making up as much as 70 to 80% of comprehension. So I find that absolutely fascinating, that idea that it's an outcome of comprehension and a precursor to it. And we know, you know, if our students don't understand the meaning of a word, then sometimes that can completely throw them off track as to what the story was about or how a character's feeling. Vocabulary knowledge is a critical factor in the school success of English language learners, and I'm going to say all learners, actually. There's a gap. This is the part that's, there's a gap in vocabulary knowledge between economically disadvantaged and economically advantaged children that begins in preschool and persists through the school years and is an important correlate of poor school performance. This is the part that really, I guess, breaks my heart, because so much research has confirmed this, that gap between economically disadvantaged and advantaged. You might be familiar with this study, Hart and Risley's study in 1995. And they, well, actually, I'm going to tell you about this study because I had always read about it, but I hadn't actually read it, the original study. Basically, what happened is they were working with a school that was tacked onto a kinder in America, or tacked onto an early learning place in America. And they were wondering what influence they could have, because it was a low socioeconomic school, but they had professors would send their own children there, the ones that were working at the school. And so they noticed there was a difference between the kids and the vocab that they came to the kinder with, or came to the early learning center with. And so they wanted to know, if we engage in explicit vocabulary instruction, can we change, you know, that level of vocabulary of each of these two groups? So they conducted this research to say, well, what's the story with vocabulary exposure for students in the different in the different groups? So in the welfare families, in the working class families. Are they exposed to different amounts of words? What type of words? All of that. It was so interesting. What I found even more fascinating was they did this study, and, well, unfortunately, they found that, yes, there is a big difference between the words these students are exposed to, but they were lucky enough to go back into the homes of these students and to, it was about 5 years later, to see, did this vocabulary, was it the same? You know, did it follow a pattern? And so they sat in these kids' houses listening to every single word that was said and recording, you know, how many words they're being exposed to and the types of words. What an amazing piece of research. So this is what they found. Simply in words heard, the average child on welfare was having half as much experience per hour as the average working class child, and less than a third that of the average child in a professional family. So that's just the words that are being spoken in the house. Now, I guess for me, my question about this is I'd be so interested to know what's the difference now that there's so much technology in the house, because I think that the technology in houses absolutely has put a halt on conversations in the house. So I'd be really fascinated to see if they did this study again now, what impact it would have. But obviously you can see there's a problem here. Just in the amount of words heard, the average child on welfare, 616 versus 2,153. So here, this is what it looks like in 1 year, the difference. And after 4 years, that's where they came up with this idea of the 30 million word gap. So this is the difference of number of words that these students are exposed to. And then they go on to talk about the complexity of those words as well. It's enormous. Okay, so the research on vocabulary instruction. Now, I've spoken about vocabulary instruction in lots of schools, but what I am fascinated by, recent research has said, actually, do you know what? We haven't decided, or we haven't found the most effective way to teach vocabulary. We know, we've done all this research and we know that it's really important and it impacts, fluency and comprehension and all of this. But we haven't actually pinpointed the most effective way to teach it, which I think is fascinating. I hadn't actually realized that until I was reading the research for this. So there are some consistent elements that research suggests happen in effective vocabulary instruction. And one of the things that you might find really interesting, I did, is that in their research to try and find the most effective method of instruction of vocabulary, it wasn't necessarily a case of the classes and the teachers who spend the most time on vocabulary instruction have the best results. In fact, some of the research suggested that some of the interventions being trialed were really lengthy and time intensive, but actually weren't having the benefits of some of the vocab instructional approaches that weren't as time consuming. So it's obviously about the types of activities that you're doing and how you're introducing the words. So a couple of things they have, joined in unison on. Firstly, that effective vocab intervention can help reading difficulties later on. So it's not a case of going, oh my goodness, 30 million word gap, what can I ever do? No, there is hope for these students. So we can work towards improving their outcomes. It's not a given. They don't walk into our school and then it's given. So I think, yes, that's exciting for our kids. Even limited vocabulary instruction, i.e. less than 1 minute per word, is better than no vocabulary instruction if the goal is to support students' comprehension of a particular text. Okay. And then the third one is that active processing of word meanings during instruction had a greater impact on comprehension than passive approaches, such as being told the definition of words. Okay, so how do you teach, or how do students learn new words? What's the most effective way? Well, this research by Wright and Newman, they seem to be the biggest bigwigs in the area of vocab research recently. I don't know if that's how they introduce themselves at conferences, but they've got quite a few research articles out. This is what they've suggested. That we need repeated exposure. So it's not enough, if I'm reading a challenging text, this is what my husband needs to understand, because he, for some reason, has an outstanding vocabulary, even though I read a lot. You can't just say the word once and think that the kids are going to know it forever after. I'll have to let my husband know that. We learn words that are relevant and useful. So if we think, oh, yeah, that's going to be helpful for me in my life, or I'm going to use that again, I'm going to remember those words. Whereas some of the words say, something to do with maybe football, that I think, well, I'm never going to use that again. I'm not going to store that one in my brain. We learn words when we have opportunities for active processing. And that was what that research said. Active processing, which means I, as the learner, get to play with the words. I get to roll them around in my tongue. I get to test them out. I get to try it in this sentence and work out if it fits in that sentence, rather than, you know, I've been given a definition, I've sat here and not had to do much thinking myself. We learn words when we engage in conversation. Yes, another tick for speaking and listening. And another plug for the speaking and listening webinar. You can go and watch the recording of that one. We learn new words when we read, and we learn new words when we learn new things. Now, it's not enough to just hope that kids will learn new words when they're reading. And if you think, hello, if we're down in F to 2, we're probably not being exposed to a wide vocabulary of in the books that our students are reading down there. So we've got to be more specific about how we're going to introduce new words to our students down in the junior area. Okay, so we've got that idea of incidental learning. So they're the words that I'm going to trip over, or maybe as I'm reading the class novel aloud, I'll say, oh, scrumptious. Oh, do you know what that means? Scrumptious means it tastes really great. It tastes really good. And then I've moved on. You know, I haven't done a whole big teaching session on the word scrumptious. It's just, you know, in the moment, versus intentional learning, that's the one that we're going to talk about. And unfortunately, the research that Wright has done in junior classrooms suggests that actually this intentional teaching of vocabulary doesn't happen very often. So it's often left to that incidental learning, but unfortunately, not that intentional learning. All right, so when it comes to intentional learning, this is when we are more precise. We have selected words that we are going to teach. It's not that we're teaching them because it just so happened to pop up in the class novel right now. So for a sample word teaching cycle, I like to use the work from Beck, McEwen and Kukan, Bringing Words to Life. This is the second edition of their book. And in there, for junior classrooms, they recommend this sort of process if you're going to be introducing vocabulary to your students. So first and foremost, that the vocabulary that you are selecting to teach, because we know it has to be relevant or we're not going to learn it, they suggest the class read aloud is a terrific place to be collecting words for instruction. So if you think about, you know, the picture storybooks that we're reading to our students, they are peppered with beautiful, rich language that we can be drawing on for our students. So the idea is we're going to read, well, obviously, before we read, it's not just a case of yank the book off the shelf and start teaching the words. We are going to be specific about this. We're going to select a book. We're going to read through the book. We're going to think, okay, which words in here might be useful for instruction? When we get to the part where we're instructing students, we're going to contextualize the word in the story. So we're going to say, you know, in the story, the BFG said that the cucumber was scrumptious. So scrumptious means, you know, that something tastes really nice. We're going to ask the students to repeat the word after us because they've got to roll it around on their little tongues so they can have a go at saying it. We're going to explain the meaning of the word. Now, this is actually so hard. You need to explain the word without using the word and using words that students already have access to. So I can tell you from experience, you need to pre-plan this, because when you're put on the spot and you're trying to think of an explanation that is using words your students already understand and probably doesn't involve the word, actually can be really challenging. And I'm going to give you a go of that in a minute. If you think, oh, it can't be that hard, I'm going to test you in a minute. We need to provide examples in other contexts. So we can't just talk about the context of the word in that particular book. We need to talk about the word outside of that book as well. So maybe when I had my birthday party and my brother made a cake that was scrumptious, and some of the guests said that it was scrumptious. So the students can see, oh, this word can be used in that context and that context. It's not just, you know, the BFG who uses that word. I don't know, he doesn't use scrumptious, he used scrumdiddlyumptious. I shouldn't have used him as an example. And then students are going to engage in activities that encourage them to interact with the word. So basically you're just trying to sneakily get them to, you know, use the word themselves multiple times and constantly be building to their understanding of what that word means. So here's an example. If the word's reluctant, tell me something you would be reluctant to do. So they've got to think, oh, what does that mean? And then I've got to come up with an answer. Yeah, I would be reluctant to, unpack the dishwasher. Show me what your face might look like after you've eaten something delicious versus, disgusting. So this is the bringing words to life approach to introducing students to vocabulary. Their recommendation and my own recommendation is that for junior classrooms, 3 to 5 words is a lot. I probably wouldn't do any more than that in a week or from a book. So don't try and do too many words because it can be a bit overwhelming. All right, let's have a practice. I have selected 2 of this year's, okay, I'm a little bit biased. These are CBCA Book Week notable books. So we've got Ali's Dragon by Bob Graham, which is a shortlisted book, and Salty Mama by Sandra Kendall, which is a non-fiction. It wasn't shortlisted, but it's in the notables. Both suitable for F2 classrooms. The first thing that we would do if we're going to be teaching our students some vocabulary is we're going to have to work out which words to teach. So this is where 3 tiers of vocabulary instruction comes into play. Beck and McEwen say that all words can be divided into tiers of vocabulary. So in tier 1, these are words that our students are likely, I always say, these are words that our students are likely to hear out in the playground. These are words that are likely to be, heard on the TV or just in their normal lives. So if we're looking at a book like Ali's Dragon, we've got words like dragon, popcorn, extra, things that kids are already likely to understand, hear it in spoken vocabulary a lot. Tier 2 words are words that are a bit more complex and not always heard out in, just running around the yard at lunchtime. These are words that are seen more often in the written word, so particularly in stories. And if we're looking at Ali's Dragon, I've selected downward, skipped, as in skipped her mind, outings, outgrown, and affectionate. So it's sort of leveling up the complexity of the words. They're not necessarily going to hear these when they're running around at playtime. Tier 2 words are the words that your students need to know to be successful in academia. And words like analyze, describe, illustrate, when they start getting into standardized tests, sometimes it's those words, those tier 2 words, that can trip the kids up. Tier 3, these are domain specific words. So these are words that are sort of attached to an area. So maybe a science word or a maths word. In this book, I've said nasturtiums are a tier 3 word because I'm going to say they're specific to botany. I think they are. Do you agree? I don't think it's a tier 2 word because it's not something that you're going to use regularly. It's just a very specific, it's a flower. So knowing these tiers of words is going to help me to select which words I might use for instruction. So they are suggesting that tier 1 words, we wouldn't use much of our instructional time to work on tier 1 words. Obviously, if you have EAL students, they might need to work on those in a small group setting, but in a whole group setting, we're usually aiming for mostly tier 2 words. And if we're trying to build our students' knowledge of domain-specific words, then we might throw in some tier 3 words, particularly when we're starting to talk about mathematics, so multiply or something like that. So we're trying to aim around that tier 2 because our kids aren't going to necessarily trip over these words and learn them themselves. All right. And picture storybooks are the best for finding these words. Okay. Here's your test. This book, Salty Mama, I have selected a bunch of words from this text, and I want you to have a go at categorizing them into tier 1, 2, or 3 words. I'm giving you 2 minutes. If you've got the resource pack, you can draw them, you can write them in the triangle. I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes is up. How did you go? I see some people writing it in the chat. You have to be pretty brave to put in there to make sure that it's right. This is what I think. Not necessarily that it's right. I will say sometimes people wonder whether words can change depending on student knowledge. The words don't change. So if it's a tier 2 word for every student, it's not a matter of this student doesn't have a wide vocabulary, so it's a tier 2 or 3 for them. The words don't change. It's tier 2 for life, you know? All right, so for tier 1, and you can, disagree with me in the chat if you like. I've said crocodile, busy, and chasers because I think they're words that kids are likely to hear in their normal lives. I'm too busy to do that right now. He chased me around the corner. See what your thoughts are. Tier 2, I've said sneaky, lunging, protective, and constructs. These are words I don't think would be as common in oral vocabulary. Maybe sneaky because some kids are a bit sneaky. And I put crustacean in tier 3, and I see someone said in the chat it's hard to spell, so it might be in tier 3. It is hard to spell. All right, so that's my thinking around the 3 tiers of language. Actually, it's not as easy as you think. And when I work with teachers, we often will have a practice of doing this. We'll look through a picture storybook, and sometimes I find teachers really struggle with this. So I think it's just easy to think, would kids hear that in oral language a lot, tier 1? Would they mainly see that in written work, tier 2? Does it sound like it's domain specific, tier 3? Now, the other thing is, because this is a lot of words. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 words. I can't overwhelm my F2 kids with 9 words. So my next job as a teacher is to work out, well, out of all of these 9 words, which ones might I take forward for instruction? Because if I'll overwhelm them if I hit them with 9 words. And I see here, someone in the chat has said that they've used the vocabulary cycles in the past, and they agreed that 3 words is a lot for the junior students, especially if you want to do it well. So how do I now, get this down to a smaller list? Well, you got to do a bit more thinking about the words. Firstly, you need to think about word mileage. So that is, how far can I get with this word? How many other teaching opportunities might spring out of this word? And I think, if we look at our list here, what have we got? I think sneaky has a lot of opportunity. I'd love to see my kids using the word sneaky in their writing. Personally, I am biased towards verbs because I think it significantly improves student writing. So that's my own thing. I just go towards teaching verbs more than anything else. Also consider the synonyms and the antonyms, things that mean the same or non-examples. Because if we're going to introduce to our students the word sneaky, well, that's a good opportunity to introduce other words that have a similar meaning to sneaky. So we're actually sneaking in more than one word in our vocab instruction. My husband was so proud of that pun I just did, and I amused myself. So we're thinking about, I'm going to teach that word sneaky, but yeah, I could teach some of the synonyms, or I could teach the antonym, the opposite of sneaky. So if someone's not sneaky, what are they? As we've seen, developing a child-friendly explanation, very difficult. And I saw someone in the chat said, oh, actually, it was really hard. They had to explain a word ambition today and had to try and come up with an on-the-spot explanation. Also, obviously, now that we're thinking about phonological awareness, let's think about the phonological awareness or the phonemic awareness teaching opportunities, or the phonic teaching opportunities that come with the words that are on your list. So that can help us to narrow down the list. You can see here, generative words. So if I'm using the word protective, I could also talk about the word protect, and I could also talk about the word protected. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about mileage, So even though I'm teaching them one word, I'm really actually exposing them to many more. This idea of morphemes, morphological awareness. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sound in the word. Well, morphemes are the smallest unit of meaning in a word, okay? So if we've got the word protected, what does the ED on the end of this word represent? What do we know about this word if it has an ED on the end of it? That's morphological awareness. If we have the word dog and we have the word dogs, What does that S on the end represent? Well, it represents meaning. We know that there's more than one dog in that group, and there's only one dog in the first group because it's showing us that it's plural. So it's really a whole lot of knowledge is packed into that, knowing that's what morphological awareness is, okay? Students who understand how words are formed by combining prefixes, suffixes, and roots tend to have larger vocabularies and better reading comprehension than peers without such knowledge and skills. So when we're looking at words to teach, when we're narrowing our list down from 9 to 3, let's think, are there words in here that have some prefixes or suffixes that I could teach? Because once I teach them that prefix, so if a word has then unprotected, then it can help them with other words that start with Morphological awareness can account for unique variance in reading and spelling performance, and interventions that integrate morphological awareness show promising results for enhancing word reading and spelling. So just thinking about, we've got phonological awareness, we've got phonemic awareness, and now we're throwing in morphological awareness. Okay, I was going to show you a video from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit from the junior version. This video here, this is the early childhood section of the Literacy Toolkit. I'm going to skip this. I just wanted to bring it to your attention because the early childhood section of Literacy Toolkit does actually have some really great videos, and they might be useful for you if you're an F2 teacher. So this was a gorgeous video about a kinder class talking about a river and how the water travels down the river, and they were just looking for synonyms for the word flow. So all of the students have sat around the river and come up with different words that mean the same thing as flow. It's gorgeous. So you'll have to watch that one in your own time. All right, just to finish off, wanted to show you this. This is written evidence from Foundation Classroom. They're working on introducing 3 words of the week. On the first day, they introduced the word. The second day, this is on a big A3 sheet. They went back to the word because remember, we're going to have multiple exposures, drew illustration to match the word, added a meaning the next day and a sentence. So we're constantly coming back to get these words cycling through our kids' minds. So they're constantly thinking about words. This can be homework for you. Select some of the words from Salty Mum and have a go at writing a student-friendly definition. It is not easy, okay? All right, just to finish up, I wanted to remind you all of the resources from this webinar series can be found on the Fuse website. That includes the resource pack, the link to the Padlet, and the slide deck as well after once we're finished. If you're interested in learning more about phonological awareness, here's a couple of resources. The one on the left is more theory-based. I love theory, so I went for that. If you're more practical, Letter Lessons and First Words has some great ideas in there. Vocabulary, the one on the left is a teacher's guide to vocabulary development across the day, and that is in grades K to 3 or F to 3. So that's more practical, and then on the right is probably more theory, closing the vocabulary gap. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us. I will see you in the next webinar. We're going to talk about all things interactive writing. So see you then, everyone. Have a good night.